All right. Yesterday, we ended class. We were talking about the growth and the spread of the Baptist and the Methodist churches. Of course, exactly what we were talking about was Lyman Hall. Yes. Yes. Get Bryce for me, please. Lyman Hall, of course, signed the Declaration of Independence. He would become the governor of Georgia. He is a preacher. He's also a medical doctor, in addition to being a politician. And so he has an understanding of the church and community. And so as governor, he really pushes for the churches that had been destroyed during the Revolutionary War to be rebuilt. Again, because he understands the importance of those buildings in small communities. And it's still true today to a certain extent. All right, let's see if I can get this to work. It's on. There we go. What? All right. So we talked about John Wesley. This is the second time that John Wesley has shown up. He comes in 1736 with James Oglethorpe. He doesn't stay very long because of a woman. He falls in love. She does not return his love. And so he does something that's rather petty. He refuses to serve her communion. He's the priest, Anglican Church. She is a member of the Anglican Church, and he refuses to have her or allow her to take communion. That pretty much was him saying she has done something terribly wrong. So wrong that she can't take communion. Her father becomes involved and gets things straightened out. John Wesley ends up leaving and going back to England, pretty much in disgrace. He does come back eventually. So yeah, there you have John Wesley. Now, what was your question? What was your question?
Like technically just like took away her Jesus rights.
No, he just took away her right to partake in communion.
So like she could still go to church.
Yeah, she just couldn't take communion. So what you have here is a Revolutionary War church, and I show you that just so you get an idea of the size that we're talking about. And this would have been a rather nice church during the Revolutionary War. There's at least one still standing on St. Simon's, I think. It's actually called the Wesley Chapel. John Wesley had it built. But again, they're very important in the life of the community. And in fact, today, you know, they're still important for a lot of people anyway. All right. Where? No, they don't. They don't. It's tiny. I mean, it would fit in this room. The greatest growth of the church occurs between the Baptist and the Methodist. That shouldn't come as a surprise. What should come as a surprise is that the first African-American church in Georgia, one of the first in U.S. history, is established in Savannah in 1788. Now, why you should be surprised by that is slave owners did not want their slaves meeting in large groups together. Why? Okay, they might plan to escape or plan a rebellion, a revolt. But here you have in Savannah the owners building their slaves a church building. And it becomes known as the first colored Baptist church. Still there today. You can go and visit. You're there on Sunday, go to church at the First Colored Baptist Church, downtown Savannah. I don't know the address. You can look it up though. All right. Today, if you look around Georgia, the two biggest denominations are going to be the Baptist Church and the Methodist Church. And that all starts right after the Revolutionary War because of really the death of the Anglican Church in Georgia, in the United States. There's the First Colored Baptist Church of Savannah. Why does it have two front doors?
Because black people and white people. Is that not?
Black folks and white folks didn't worship together. Well, it'd be for men and women. That's a good idea, but it's actually men and women sat on separate sides. One door was for women, one door was for men. It's kind of a carryover from Judaism, from the synagogue. In the synagogue, Jews, men and women were separate. If you go into a mosque today, you would find that same thing, men and women separate. I don't know why. I mean, you know, you look around any church in America today and mom and daddy are snuggled up next to each other and the babies are, you know, eating goldfish, just trying to be quiet, right? That wasn't the case back then.
So what if it's children?
With their mom and daddy,
So I know that-
probably with their mama, if they were a girl, and their daddy, if they were a boy. Or they may have both sat with mama. All right. So Georgia's growing, and we looked at some of the reasons or some of the ways that Georgia did grow. One of the things they have to do is to attract people. And one of the ways they attract people is by offering land. Not just land, but free land. I don't know about you, but I'd take some free land. That's the one big resource that Georgia has. From the Savannah River over here, all the way over here to the Mississippi River. That's Georgia. What is the one thing they have a lot of? Land. And they're trying to give it away. Hey, if you'll come and move here, we'll give you X amount of acres. Okay, good deal. Until it wasn't. Three different things happen. Two of them are very closely related. The other is a result of the second thing. Actually, before the Revolutionary War, Georgia was giving away land under the headright system. James Wright, the governor of Georgia, had kind of come up with this idea. And under the headright system, of course, each head of a household was given 100 acres. And then he got 50 additional acres for each additional family member, including slaves, up to 1,000 acres. Nobody could own more than 1,000 acres under the headright system. And so the result of this is thousands of people immigrate to Georgia. Free land. From the Savannah River to the Mississippi River. One of the problems, though, is nobody comes this far. And eventually nobody is allowed to come this far. And the question becomes, why? And the answer is real simple, and we'll get to it in a minute. All right, so look at the map on the right. You've got 1782 to 1795, land was distributed under the headright system, 1,000 acres, right? 100 acres for the head of household, 50 for each additional family member. And it kind of comes to an end in 1795, but it's actually in place until 1803. From 1805 to 1833, it is given away using a land lottery. And we'll talk about that today, hopefully. Off to the left, you see Indian land cessions. A land cession for the Indian is they are giving up their land. And the group that is primarily giving up their land are the Creek. And so from 1805 until 1833, white settlers are moving toward the west, and they're pushing the Creek in front of them. They're pushing the Creek out of Georgia eventually. And then later it becomes the Cherokee. All right. So we said that nobody really ever settled out here, right? And the reason for that is the Yazoo land fraud of 1795. Now, I think you're old enough to hear this. I think you're old enough to understand this. If the government is giving something away for free, if the government is giving something away for free, people are going to try to take advantage of it. That will be the people that it's being given to, and that can also be the people who are giving it. For example, suppose I'm giving away land. Aaron is a member of the Georgia General Assembly. I slip him an extra 500. Say, hey, can you help a brother out? Can you give me another 1,000 acres? And Aaron, sure. So he gives me 1,000 acres. Is that legal? No. Is it right? No. But we don't care about that. He wants his money. I want my land. The only problem is Aaron has given me land that already belongs to Charles. So I go to examine my land, and there's Charles. He's got a nice house, beautiful wife, 15 children, 3 dogs, a cow, and a horse. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing on my land? And he goes, dude, what are you doing on my land? And we suddenly realize what? We have both been double-crossed. Aaron has taken my money and given me land that belongs to Charles. And that was happening all over the place. What? He's the Georgia General Assembly. Absolutely. Because Aaron has gone to Tennessee. He's not there anymore. So we see that happening. State officials, members of the Georgia General Assembly, are accepting bribes, and in return, they're giving out land grants larger than the 1,000-acre limit. The most famous example of this we call the Yazoo land fraud. The Yazoo land fraud is that land between the Mississippi River and the Yazoo River. That's the Yazoo territory. And Georgia, members of the Georgia General Assembly are being dishonest. The United States is only about 12 years old at this point, and this becomes the first major scandal in American history. And it's got a pretty cool name, too. Yazoo. So, this is what happened. There were land speculators, and there is nothing wrong with land speculation. That simply means that a person is going to buy land at one price and hopefully be able to sell it at a higher price. Why? So that he makes money on the deal. Well, land speculation companies, there are actually 4 of them, want the Yazoo territory, and so they bribe members of the Georgia General Assembly to sell them land at an incredibly low price. Okay? The amount of land was 35 million acres. Somebody write that down, 35 million acres. You're going to have to do math. You want to take a shot in the dark at how much it cost them? $500 or $500,000? It might as well have been free. $500,000. So how much did it cost per acre? That's the math. Nope. Divide 500,000 by 35 million. Nope. You got to move some decimals. Move another decimal. No, wrong way. What? 7 cents per acre. 7 cents per acre. Now, today, you could buy a grain of sand for 7 cents. An acre of land in Baldwin County costs anywhere from $10,000 to $100,000. And how much is an acre? Think football field. Football field is actually a little more than an acre. So these speculation companies bought 35 million acres, 7 cents an acre, and they were able to make incredible profit, as you might imagine. Now, how many of you have ever done anything wrong in your life that you thought you got away with? You thought you got away with it, but either you cracked under the pressure, I did it, or your baby brother or your baby sister told on you. Yeah, that's usually what happens, right? Or mom and dad find the evidence, right? Well, the people of Georgia found out what their legislators had been doing, and they are incredibly angry. They march on Louisville, which is the capital at the time. They take the Yazoo Act along with those honest legislators, because there were some, and they burn the Yazoo Act on the steps of the state capitol as their form of protest. Now, like every other good red-blooded American, when they're wronged, what did they do? They sued, right? I mean, if your cow comes onto my property and destroys my property, what am I going to do? First of all, I'm going to eat steak. But secondly, who's going to pay for the damages? Because I'm going to sue and I'm going to win, right? And so that will actually happen here. But before it happens, James Jackson, who is one of our senators, senator from Georgia, hears about what's going on in his home state. He makes the comment that he is personally going to shoot everyone involved in the scandal. Well, the Georgia General Assembly repeals the Yazoo Act in 1796. James Jackson is involved in spearheading that. And there's James Jackson. He looks like he might shoot you.
Oh. Why did that do his side profile?
Saw off that prominent nose. The burning of the Yazoo Act, kind of an interesting picture. How do they start the fire? How do they start this fire? With what? The magnifying glass. I mean, Why else would that guy be standing in a crowd of people with a magnifying glass? So he could burn the paper. All right. So there are people who hear of James Jackson's promise and they leave. They just leave the state. One of those people is the governor of Georgia, George Matthews. And again, Georgia is sued. Not once, not twice, but there are multiple lawsuits against the state and against these companies filed by people who have been cheated. Charles and I suing the state of Georgia. Even though the state of Georgia, I guess, is not responsible, one of her legislators was responsible. So Georgia finds itself in a pickle. There's no way they could pay off the lawsuits. They don't have that much money, but the U.S. government does. And so in exchange for the U.S. government paying off those lawsuits, Georgia gives up the Yazoo territory, basically gives up what is today Alabama and Mississippi. And of course, those would become the states of Alabama and Mississippi. Now, Georgia doesn't have as much free land. They went from the Savannah to the Mississippi to the Savannah to the Chattahoochee. So really, they've been cut by 2/3. And so the head right system will not work anymore. There's not enough land. And so Georgia turns to what are called land lotteries. A lottery, even if you go, and you buy a lottery ticket, you're basically just putting your name in the hat, right? Some people do it multiple times. Some people do it once. Under Georgia's land lottery, a person could receive anywhere from 500 to 50 acres. So the low would be 50, the high would be 500. Those eligible were all free white men who had lived in Georgia for a year. They got one chance. So if I move here from New Hampshire, I've been here a year, my name goes in the pot one time. Kevin is a veteran of the American Revolution. He's lived in Georgia for over a year. His name goes in twice because he's a veteran. Helen Ann, well, unfortunately, her husband got bitten by a rabid wolf and he died. She's a widow with 15 children. Her name goes in twice. So if you're a free white man, at least once. If you're a widow, at least twice. And if you won, you were called a fortunate drawer. Makes me think of lucky draws for some reason. Fortunate drawers. A fortunate drawer. Georgia holds 7 of these land lotteries from 1805 to 1832. And they again attract people to the state, but at the same time, they push the Creek out of their traditional lands. Not the Cherokee yet, but that's coming. And so the state finds itself in conflict with the Creek and the Cherokee Indians. The Creek, again, are eventually pushed out west of the Chattahoochee. And close to 1840, the Cherokee are pushed out as well. This map shows the land lotteries. Right here is land that's given away under the head right system, and then each little section was a land lottery, starting in 1805, 1807, 1820, 1821, 1827, and 1832, and land is given away. It's interesting. Georgia does this really early in the 19th century. The United States will do the same thing late in the 19th century. They will give away land, encouraging people to move west. And today there's still land in places like Montana and Wyoming that was secured by people in the 1880s. If you watch the program Yellowstone, it's a fictitious ranch in Montana, and it was actually secured by that family in 1883, 1884. So that's not atypical of what was happening during that time. All right. So the mid 1800s rolls around, the 1830s are gone. There's some things that happened in the 1830s that we'll come back and talk about regarding Native Americans. But by the middle of the 1800s, Georgia has become an economic power. There's something that happens in the late 1700s, 1790s, that automatically propels Georgia into the economic forefront, makes Georgia an economic powerhouse. And with economic power comes political power. And there are several reasons that we'll talk about. Number one is King Cotton. In colonial Georgia, there's not an awful lot of cotton that's being grown. It's expensive. It's hard to process. And so people in Georgia, people in the South, pretty much just don't grow cotton. And the real difficult thing is the cotton boll. Looks like this. And in order to process cotton, labor would have to take the boll out of its cover and then separate the seeds. Well, one thing about this little thing right here is it's sharp. It's got little pokey things on it. And so if you're doing that, what are you going to do to your fingers? You're going to poke yourself. You're going to bleed. And then you got to pull the seeds out. Feel the seed right there? Yeah, I'll pass it around. Takes a lot of people. So if you're growing a lot of cotton, you got to have a lot of people simply to pick the seeds out of the cotton. Well, Eli Whitney in 1793 is actually not visiting a plantation. He's actually living on one. It is the plantation of Nathaniel Greene's widow, Revolutionary War hero. She has hired him to tutor her children. And while he's there, of course, he pays attention to what's going on. He notices slaves cleaning cotton, picking the seeds out. And he thinks to himself, there's got to be an easier way. And so he begins to tinker. He ends up drawing plans for what he called a cotton engine or a cotton gin. And it is a mechanical process that allows you to clean the seeds out of cotton. He thinks that by creating this machine, he can put an end to slavery. Eli Whitney's from Connecticut, one of the New England states or mid-Atlantic colonies, states, and he thinks that would be a way to get rid of slavery. He doesn't think it through. Suddenly, literally almost overnight, cotton becomes a profitable crop. And so if you're going to make profit off of cotton, you have to grow a lot of cotton. So people do. It becomes the dominant crop in the South. Georgia is the South and the nation's largest producer of cotton. But again, more cotton means you got to have more labor. And where's that labor come from? Slaves. The more cotton you grow, the more slaves you can own. The more slaves you own, the more cotton you can grow. The more cotton you grow, the more slaves you need. The more slaves you have, the more cotton you grow. So rather than putting an end to slavery, slavery explodes across the Southeast. You're going to see a chart here in just a minute. In 1790, there were 75,000 slaves living in the Southeast, in the South. By 1860, 70 years, there's 4.5 million slaves living in the American South, most involved in the production of cotton. Let me ask you this question. Okay. And it's a question that I think still has some relevance for us today. Does slavery exist today? It does. It might be that, you know, your Nike tennis shoes are made by child labor in Sri Lanka, slave labor. Okay. Are you supporting slavery by buying Nike tennis shoes? If it's made using slave labor, you certainly are. And so one of the things we'll talk about later is the North, right? Totally against slavery, but they want Southern cotton. And so in many ways, even though they are vocally opposed to slavery, they support slavery because they buy cotton from the South. Again, that's something we'll talk about a little later. All right. Picture of a cotton gin. And we'll pick up with that tomorrow.